So when I began teaching about 35 years ago, it was at the behest of one doctor of zoology who, I hope she forgives me if I tell her story, but she said to me, now I've done what my uh, parents wanted me to do. Now I'm going to do what I want to do. And her request of me was that, having heard that Gamal didn't teach women, her request of me was, would I teach her exactly what and how Gamal had taught me? And that was the beginning of my studio. And I started out in the studio doing that. Thank you, Lindsay. And but over the course of a bunch of years, uh, my evolution as a painter, personally as a painter, has enabled me to teach something else. Does that mean in any way uh, that I can't teach still exactly what Gamal taught me? No, it's the academic way. It's what everybody painting today, practically, who's got academic stuff going on, is coming from Gamal. So we all did it, and I'll show you some of my early stuff so you can see what I mean by that. But the reason I mentioned this, though, is I was looking at the work of some efforts. I mean, efforts to fully accommodate, fully grasp what I'm saying in this, as I call it, the Boston School way, a Boston School way of thinking. And I found this person still using Gamal methods and being interfered with by these methods, being slowed down by these academic methods. So, as I've told you before, what I mean by that is the drawing of objects at the expense of effects, and that is, say, at the expense of the impression, the visual impression, and, as it were, impressionism, drawing objects and getting them in the right places, making them the right size, and all the rest of that stuff. And so those are rather the two models, right, historically. And so when I do intensives here in the studio in the summertime, it's for people who actually have a reasonable grasp of some command of drawing, at least the ability to get shapes, proportions, etc., like form. And then I can actually, for those who actually want it, I can actually make an effort in a 6-week period of time, which those of you who have tried it have found takes maybe a little more than that. But I can begin to walk you to a different way of working, an entirely different way of working. So I want to talk about this thing that, what was it, Reynolds said, Sir Joshua Reynolds, who everybody should read the discourses of Sir Joshua Reynolds. But he said, genius lies in seeing the thing as a whole. Now, by the time you get to the Impressionists, we're talking about a visual impression as a whole, not an assemblage of objects, right? So that is a major, major difference. In fact, I would suggest that the word ensemble actually belongs to the purely visual, whereas assemblage, or you can find dozens of other words, groupings and all those sorts of things. When you're putting people together or objects together in a still life, those are called groupings or assemblages of stuff, right? And your job is to draw one piece of stuff after another. But when you're drawing and you're painting impressionistically, you actually work in an entirely different order. And I want to show you that one thing that it meant to this student that had never come across to that person at all, apparently. Let me just use some pictures. So this gives you an idea. Obviously, you're talking Benson here, and I'm talking about now. I'm going to talk about in this whole thing, and I come back and forth between the two. But I'm going to talk about this whole thing, how the visual impression mindset works, and how the methodology of the Boston School is different. So what you're seeing here is a classic Boston School painter. This is Benson, right? And Benson's got, you can see these things, the top and the top two, in fact, are in significant chiaroscuro. The bottom one looks more like almost a cutout. It's almost the opposite. It's actually more lost in the lights than in the darks and so on. But nevertheless, what you can see when you look at any of these three is an assemblage of effects, right? Or of colors or of that sort of thing, right? You don't quite get that. I'm going to go to a different picture. You don't quite get that same thing looking at, well, let me look at these two. This is Paxton on the left and Leslie Thompson, who was a student of the Boston School, graduated from the Boston School training under Tarbell, and one of their very top students. But you see the difference between what Paxton is doing, and here again I want to talk about an assemblage of objects, and what Thompson is doing, which is an ensemble of effects, but it's an ensemble of visual stuff, right? So let me use that word anyway, even if it isn't anything that means anything to you. But think of it when you think that way, right? And how we would approach this. Now, I took that Paxton right there, and painted it in the way that Leslie Thompson would have laid in that right picture. I made a copy for someone, and I laid it in exactly that way, in the visual order, the blurred eye, drawing the things that read to my eye with the blurred eye first, and then proceeding to as the precise finish of this painting. It was a good copy in that sense, if there is such a thing in a sense. But I'm going to just show you what some of this stuff means when you do it a different way. Now, so here I am with Gamal. Here I am on the left. Early days with Gamal. Each one of those things in there was a drawn object. There's a rug in the background. There's a Cupid sort of a relief in the middle, and a horn, a compote leaf, grapes, I guess, and a doily, and a brass pot. Each one of those was drawn with no consideration of the abstract relationships at the beginning, right? And believe me, that is a big difference, because you can push things around and get some of those effects at the end, but you will have exhausted your neural energy. You won't even have any left. I find that with students who work hard and work really fast and they draw objects, is they don't quite get, they just don't have the energy or the will, actually, to tear down what they would have to tear down to get back to the order of things visual. But the one on the right shows you, now this is just a single portrait. You'd think, how in the world do you think that way about a portrait? But look at it. This is a lay-in. This is the beginning of a portrait. The canvas is covered. And what you'll see is I determined that, and again, with each of these ones, if you blur your eyes, the ones I'm showing you that are mine or somebody else's, if you blur your eyes, you'll be able to see what I found to be the most significant, most powerful points on this picture. Things like this, and this, and data like this, and spots, right? So this is an assemblage of these sorts of things: color spots, value spots, leading edges, etc. Right? This is just a visual point. It's not a part in a girl's hair. I don't have to know anything about the anatomy of parts in women's hair to do this, and to do it correctly, to do it with authority and accuracy. But what happened in the course of that discussion I was having with this student was that she appeared to be having a problem with the height. So let's just talk about this one right here. And the height was interfering with, or what she hadn't picked up on, was that the height is no issue to us. We don't work from the height of objects, right? So, you know, in the early training I've given somebody, they were setting up pictures in a sight size orientation, but I was not teaching sight size, and yet they glommed on to something rather like sight size. So I would say to the student, yeah, I want you to paint this figure life size. So I want you to get set a ruler over there and measure that thing, because I want you to paint this passage of the painting life size. And that from that point on, somehow or other, there was a belief, and boy, you do have to watch out for those things that are sitting there as beliefs that are so subconscious that you don't even remember them in one sense. But the belief that somehow you had to get a size right. So literally by choice out here. Now, if somebody told you to paint a portrait of them, like in this case here, and said, I need the head to be life size, well, then I would actually measure that much the way you would do this even in a sight size kind of picture. But, or maybe you guys don't in a sight size picture. But in any case, I would take an assessment of this thing and make that a fixed point. Here's the top, there's, shall we say, the bottom, and those things will never change. And I will build from those points, I will build out to the outside, right? However, there's another way to work that's actually when you have an ensemble of things in front of you. And I think I should show you one. I don't know, I think not that one yet. Let's just talk about Velasquez for a second and Sargent. So when you take a picture like these Sargents and these Velasquez's, you can always ask that question of whether they ran around there and drew objects all over the place very carefully. And if you came from a background where that was what you did, you might still have been doing that. But in both cases, these guys actually got what shall we say, the magic of the visual ensemble to dominate. So it doesn't look like a serious assemblage of objects. It actually looks like a beautiful distribution of spots. And when you look through a viewfinder at something like this here, you've got to have the capacity to see where this lands in the frame. This edge here. Where this lands in the frame, say something like that looks like it's pretty close to a third, more than a third. But where that lands in the frame, because those are the points that have to be articulated. Those are your setup points in a picture. But they're visual points. And if you take the strong ones, you're never going to have your picture out of visual order. Take the strong ones and use them for that. Okay. So the other points are exits. And this one here is left of center by a little tiny bit. And so very useful. This is a useful exit right here. And there are things in any number of places where you'd say these things are really good setup points, right? Now, this only works if you're talking about having a setup there and you're looking through a viewfinder at it. But the big deal about the viewfinder is that it's a fixed picture. The picture's already there. All your job is to collate the data, get it in the right places, and to do it in a sort of a sane and whatever wonderful, important way. So if this person's head seems, or say this one over here, this shoulder, say they're supposed to land here at such and such a place. That's a pretty location, isn't it, in relation to this? So it's supposed to land there. What would happen if we had already picked her size? If you see what I mean. So what happens is we land this, we really get it in the right place. But we've already got this set up down here, setting something up, and maybe it's just this newspaper touching on the edge of the frame, which is an interesting thing, which it probably isn't quite doing. But, and so our job is to make sure that this, instead of being any size in particular, simply lands in the right place in relation to the bottom of the frame. So this distance here to the hole, this size here to the hole, this distance here to this distance and the hole, and so on, are all that have to be accurate in our kind of picture. And the same thing is true once you've set this up of that location. We don't draw a person and then draw another person next to him, because these two locations will never come out okay. And if you've set up an ensemble of effects, the visual dance in them, shall we say, is fixed. And it doesn't mean you can't change them. It just means that it's fixed for you by way of the frame, for example. By the way, it's like, for example, this thing here just about touching on the frame. You're going to set that place. You're going to know that spot for sure. And anything else like it on either side of the picture, you're going to have to know exactly how far in this guy is, in relation to the frame. And a number of things like that, as I said, set up all the rest of what happens inside the frame. So this is, again, what we call working from the outside in, right, which I've talked to you about. And we work from the greater to the lesser. So we're working from great subdivisions. So the math is actually in the math of the rectangle of the viewfinder, right? It's not in the head. It's in something far bigger. And then way later, of course, it's in that area, For example, the size of her head is going to be a function of the size of that distance right there, right? And the size of her head is going to be a function of this distance and the entire length, right? So those things aren't independent and they aren't object-based. Now, if you're not a good draftsman, if you can't see with our way of, and if you don't compare well, that head may turn out to be the wrong size completely, whatever. But if you can follow what I'm saying, though, this person believed they had to get the size of that object somehow right according to something. And it may have been what I said before, like my Cupid there, just to, make that life size. Well, you don't have to make anything life size. There's nothing about life size that's actually good, except in a portrait where you're required to do it, right? A picture is not better for being life size. Now, a picture is worse, a portrait, say like this one, It's worse to hang on the wall and it looks like as it were monkey side. It looks funny next to other portraits. That's a different situation where the person looks like they might be a near dwarf or something, or not a dwarf, but Gamal called it a homunculus, but just too small for the wall, too small for the other portraits in the room. Another story entirely. So a visual painter would take this ensemble and would locate key things, say this thing, and get it exactly right to this. They would locate this sort of thing, get it in the right location this way, whatever, if there's something readable down here, this exit here, if it's an exit, just whatever it is near touching. These things are really big deal. These set up everything, and it's all from the outside in, right? It's all from the greater subdivision to the lesser. So every time you're making a point, you're not making an object, you're making a location. And if you do it with the shape of and the effect and the value contrast and the color contrast being right, you'll actually have the thing start to shoot out realism at you, a kind of realism that you will never have seen before, which I've mentioned, of course. So I sound like I'm getting mystical or something on this again. I don't mean to. I never really ever want to do that. So if you can bear with me now, this guy this Benson in this lower one, when he's setting this thing up, he's looking through a viewfinder, right? How are you going to get lucky with your proportions and that sort of thing if you don't? If you're looking through a viewfinder landscape, you've got to know exactly where this is sitting in relation to the two sides of your viewfinder, and how far this drops down, and where this is, et cetera, right? You also have to know exactly how big this is in relation to the frame. How far from the bottom, how far from the top, or whatever you can find to use, right? And the same thing this way. So this is a big deal. This picture is barely worked on, but you can see that the timing of the elements in this picture that make up the ensemble are really, really nicely placed. There's a beautifully spotted stuff. And that's whether you like that cartoony thing that he's doing or not. And I don't think he means to. I think that may be one of those places where his drawing skills show some of their sort of interesting things, decides difficulties. The other side of this is that we, in our way of working, and this is again to my student, we're always all over the place at once in the start. You can't be fixing things. You're here, yes, to be here, to be back up there, to be something over here, to begin to see what the entire setup is doing. You begin to do things like this will be kind of a significant point because it's a point for one thing, but a great locator in both this way and this way, right? So everything we do is trying to beautifully paint these effects, but set them up to the frame and not to the object. You can't mix them. Don't even think about trying to mix them. Some people do. I used to. When I first was figuring this out, I would keep going back there and think, okay, now I got all these visual things in the right place. Now let me draw these objects. And I would screw up the entire order visual, which was accurate, actually. And that's what I see happening. And it causes so many more difficulties that are not necessary. And this is very subtle. So I probably should have apologized to those of you who don't actually already know how to paint this way. This is sort of inside stuff. So so we will never be doing, if you're an ensemble-based person, you're always looking for the beauty of the ensemble. So we'll never be doing the guy and the hillside and the nice happy hills and the fish and all these sorts of things before we see that set up. Before we see the main players set up, we can see that within this rectangle. It's a beautiful piece of, now it's a beautiful ensemble. So it's a beautiful piece of design in the impressionist sense, right? Not in the assemblage of stuff sense. It's just a different discussion. You can see that same thing with all these guys as well. So I think I've covered it mostly. Let's see if I can. One of the things I should say to you is that painting, the way we do it, has this instinct at the beginning to be a summary overview, right? To be a summary, right? And so it's a good idea for me to end with these two. Here I did a demonstration at the Guild, and the intern was willing to pose for me. He seemed happy to pose for me on the stairs. They go up to the upper gallery. This gallery, by the way, having been created by Gamal in his day, really beautifully improves the Guild, skylighted thing. feature, really the feature of that gallery. Yeah. But so this is an example, though, of what I'm trying to tell you. Though I have this series of spots, right, of light, right. So this ensemble is made out of that, some series of reds. You can see that there's orange, there's darks, there are brown darks and green darks. But you can see this whole thing. There's beginning to be an ensemble of visual stuff, and there's no effort to make it an ensemble of people, right? And so you don't see us doing what you'd see Puvis doing, for example, where each individual is drawn very carefully, and the next one's drawn, over it or connecting with it, and every single piece is made real in line, and then to be noodled up. It doesn't work that way. So this, and again, directing this to my student, while I put my time into it, I didn't know what size this person was going to be, and I had nothing in here that was going to be site size or life size. It wasn't my effort. My effort is to be right proportionally within a rectangle. And boy, that's a big deal. If you can get that about when you're trying to work our way, it's a big, big, big deal. So then what did I have to get right? I had to get right the location of this to here, and to whatever extent I could get it to here, for example. I had to get the exits, of course, as you can see here and here. Now this is weak, right? It's not a very strong exit, but it's still needed, right? And this one down here. These are all exits. This picture happened to have a bunch of exits, so I had to deal with them. Even this is an exit, even though it's soft and almost unreadable. But the order of things, so there had to be, the visual ensemble had to incorporate in its first phase, the strongest readers looking like themselves. So you can see this looks like paper in a situation like that, right? Those edges are right to the other edges that are already in the picture. So it's a moving along, a gradual moving along that you really got to get used to. And don't try to bring the wrong kind of realism in the wrong kind of locations. I say the wrong kind of realism because when I articulate something like that, it's an attempt to make it as like as I can, knowing it's the first time. So you don't want to waste time being fine about it, but you have to be fairly articulate. That's why I say, again, it's a summary statement. And so this is differentiated. It has a good light effect, but the light effect is differentiated, and so is the edge from what's happening here, right? Those things are right to each other. This, right to this, and this, right? These are right to each other, these being a similar kind. They're whites on seriously high lights on dark. So each of these color contrasts are right, the edge quality is right, the location is painfully made. This width has to be right to the length of this. Not to the length of stuff, meaning objects in an area. You just get over that completely, and you're going to start finding yourself in Freedom and Liberty Hall, okay? So again, speaking to my student, if she isn't any particular size, this is a rectangle that could be big enough to make her life size, but it could be as small as, say, an 8 by 10 roughly canvas, right? The obligation is the process is still the same, right? It's to locate this and this, these exits, to locate this and the key thing here in the right place this way and the other ways, right? And as I said, the exits, wherever the exits matter. And somehow or other, you've got to figure out how you're going to get enough of the color in there right without getting too much drawing. So you'll see that it has to look like the color scheme. In both cases, this is what it looks like. This is a varnished brown floor. This is I don't remember why that wall was so, it's just a bright light hitting that wall up there. So these kinds of colors are doing that sort of thing in a very icy cold room. This is a yellow picture, but none of these notes look wrong in relation to each other, right? So all those things are yours, the likeness of the colors of the ensemble. But all I'm offering this video for is to get you to understand we aren't drawing people. We're drawing distances within the frame. So the importance of this and where it lands in relation to this is massively huge. Nothing else matters. I don't care how wide her shoulder is. It's a question for another day. Eventually, I need to know exactly where I'm going to put this for reasons related to this, and where I'm going to put this for the same reasons. And then this height here becomes the determinant of all the widths. But this height has been determined by this height. And its location, floating in space, higher or lower, has been determined while watching this big length here. Okay, so this is really dedicated to one of my students, former students, who really, really is a good painter. and has the courage to chase down this thing. Now, having used, largely the Boston School, not the Boston School, but the Gamal School methods, the more academic methods, through most of her life. Not that she hasn't accommodated most of the knowledge I've offered, but these guys sense that there's something different. A number of my former students from back then are sensing there's something different. And I'm trying to get them all the way over to this so they can be more available to you and to others out there as well as to themselves in passing on this information. So, yeah, I guess that's it. Let me look at the list of stuff here. All right. I was trying to remember who our latest donor was, but I can't. Anyway, but thank you all for the donations. Thank you for the subscribing, sharing, the comments. A number of you stepped up and commented. I haven't gotten to those yet, so keep it coming, and I look forward to seeing you the very next time, and which I hope is next Thursday. All right.